Ever get stuck like in a digital maze, trying to navigate like a government
Oh,
website?
yeah,
I think we all have. It's so frustrating.
it is.
Today we're gonna look at how like good user experience design, like UX design, can really change these experiences
Mhm.
and make digital democracy a lot more accessible and engaging for like everyone.
It's interesting. We often end up blaming, like, the technology when actually it's bad design. That's the problem.
Right.
So our deep dive today is going to be about looking at just how powerful UX design can be in, like, shaping how we interact with government. You
Yeah.
know, from simple things like, finding info to more complex things like voting.
We'll be looking at a whole bunch of topics today. We'll start by looking at accessibility
Okay?
and how good UX design makes sure that digital tools are actually usable by everybody,
Right.
regardless of their like tech skills.
Uh-huh.
Then we'll move on to how design can actually encourage people to participate in politics online
Okay.
and could even make it enjoyable,
Hopefully.
dare I say.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we'll get into how like transparency in design can actually build trust in government,
Yeah.
but it's not all good, right?
Yeah.
We also have some sources that point out the potential downsides and challenges of UX design,
Yes.
particularly when it comes to things like data privacy and the potential for manipulation.
It is a really complex landscape.
Yeah.
And I think that's why it's so important for us to understand both the positive and negative implications of UX design when we think about it in a political context.
So let's get started with accessibility.
Okay?
One of our sources actually goes into detail about the UK's gov.uk website, which has kind of become like the gold standard for user-friendly government design.
Geo.uk is such a good example of how design choices that seem really simple can have such a massive impact.
Yeah.
One of the key things about their success is that they've really committed to these UX writing principles.
Okay.
So instead of using like really complex jargon and bureaucratic language,
Right.
they've gone with this really clear, concise language that everyone can understand.
So it's like they actually thought about how like normal people actually read and process information online
Yeah.
and use things like, headings, bullet points, and clear calls to action so that the content's like scannable
Yeah.
and easy to understand.
And they've applied that same thinking to the navigation of the website.
Yeah.
So it's really intuitive and consistent.
Right.
So users can find the information they need really quickly and efficiently.
Okay.
Basically, by getting rid of these barriers, they've made it possible for way more people to access government services and info online.
It's like they've democratized access to information,
Yeah.
but like just giving people access isn't enough, is it?
No, you're right.
You also need to get people engaged and participating.
Exactly. And that's where the power of motivation through design comes in.
Okay.
Our next source looks at how platforms like change.org have used really clever UX design to take something that could be passive, like signing a petition,
Right.
and turn it into a much more dynamic and engaging experience.
I've used change.org myself, and it's so easy to navigate. You can find petitions on tons of issues,
Uh-huh.
and you can even start your own, and you can share them with all your networks with like just a few clicks.
It's incredibly user-friendly.
It really is.
I think what's so smart is how they use those gamification principles.
Oh, yeah.
So by using things like progress trackers, those social sharing buttons, and then like celebratory milestones when a petition gets to like a certain number of signatures, they've tapped into our natural desire for like achievements and recognition.
It does. It makes you feel like you're part of something bigger.
Yes.
Like your voice actually matters.
And that feeling of agency is so important for people to feel like active citizens.
Totally, both online and offline.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've talked about accessibility and participation.
Yes.
Now let's talk about another really important thing. Trust. One of our sources takes a close look at USA.gov, which is the official website for the U.S. government.
What's really striking about USA.gov is how committed they are to transparency through their design.
Okay.
So by bringing together a huge amount of government information and services into this one website that's really easy to navigate,
Right.
they've made it way easier for people to find when we need.
It's like a one-stop shop for anything government-related.
Exactly.
I remember when I was trying to find info about renewing my passport a while back, and I was so surprised by how straightforward it was on USA.gov.
Oh, nice.
Like it was all laid out in plain language with clear steps and links to the forms I needed.
That's a great example of how simple things like clear navigation and easy access to information can make people feel a lot more trusting.
Yeah.
It's about getting rid of that feeling of being lost and overwhelmed by all the bureaucracy,
Right.
and instead giving people a sense of like clarity and control.
It's like they're saying, we're not hiding anything. We want you to be informed and engaged.
Yeah.
And that makes a real difference.
It does.
But let's be honest, there are always two sides to every story.
Always.
even with the best intentions, UX design can be misused.
Yes.
And that's something that our next source really explores in depth.
You're absolutely right. We've been focusing a lot on the positive side.
Yeah.
But it's super important to recognize that there can be problems, too.
Yeah.
Even the most user-friendly design in the wrong hands
Right.
can be used to manipulate people
Mm-hmm.
or, like, nudge them towards certain choices or even to exploit their data.
The Cambridge Analytica scandal is a perfect example of how data and design can be used in a really bad way to influence political outcomes.
Yes,
It reminds us that good UX design have to be ethical.
it
It
does.
needs to put people's well-being
It
first.
does.
But how do we make sure that happens?
Yeah.
I think that's where things get really interesting, and that's exactly what we're going to explore after a quick break.
I think it's a tough challenge, but one we have to address. One way to encourage ethical UX design is to encourage transparency, like in how these systems are made and how they work.
Right.
Users should know, what data is being collected, how it's being used,
Mm-hmm.
and be able to, like, control their own privacy settings.
It's like giving people more control over their digital lives, empowering them to actually make informed decisions about how their data is used. But it's not just about, like, personal control, is it?
No, not at all. There's a system-wide aspect to this as well.
Right.
We need to establish some really clear ethical guidelines and regulations
Okay.
for UX design, in this political sphere. This means doing things like banning dark patterns.
What are dark patterns?
So those are those sneaky design tricks that, manipulate users into making choices they wouldn't normally make.
Oh, yeah.
It's about setting those boundaries
Yeah.
to make sure that design is actually empowering citizens and not exploiting them. But like you said, regulations can only do so much. We also need to create a culture of responsible design, within the tech industry itself.
That's a really good point. Designers need to be trained to think critically about, like, the ethical implications of their work.
Yeah.
To consider not only how to make something user-friendly, but also how to make sure that it's actually used for good.
Right.
So basically integrating ethics into, like, the entire design process from the beginning.
Yes.
Not just, like, tacking it on at the end.
Mm-hmm.
It's a fascinating challenge and one that I think is only going to become more and more important as technology keeps evolving.
I completely agree. As we move towards a future with, like, even more AI and automation in our lives, including our political lives, the ethical side of UX design is going to become even more crucial.
Okay, so we've been talking about a lot of the potential issues,
Right.
but let's change gears a little and look at how UX design can be used to actually make democratic processes better.
Okay.
So one area where we're seeing some pretty cool innovations is in data visualization.
Oh, yeah, data visualization could be really powerful.
I don't know, data visualization sounds kind of boring. How does that relate to democracy?
Well, it's all about making complex information accessible and engaging. Like, imagine trying to understand a huge campaign finance report. With all these little details about donations and spending,
Right.
it could be so overwhelming, even if you're really into politics.
I've tried to read those reports, like trying to read another language.
Exactly. But with good UX design, we can change all of that data into interactive carts, graphs and maps that tell a story.
Okay.
Those numbers that seem boring suddenly become alive. You can see patterns and connections you might not have noticed before.
So instead of just looking at a bunch of numbers,
Yeah.
you might see like a visual representation of how money moves through political campaigns
Right.
or like how different groups of people vote on certain issues.
Exactly. And that kind of visual storytelling can be super powerful. It helps people understand those complex issues more easily
Yeah.
and engage with political data in a more meaningful way. And ultimately, it helps them make better decisions.
It's like taking the mystery out of the political process, letting people see beyond just the sound bites and slogans.
And that's a huge step towards having more informed and engaged citizens.
Okay, let's talk about another big issue we're facing in the digital age: misinformation and fake news.
Yeah,
How can UX design help us fight against this?
that's a really important question, and it's something that designers are thinking a lot about.
Yeah.
One way to deal with it is to build fact-checking tools and ways to verify sources directly into online platforms.
So, like, instead of just seeing a headline and a link,
Right.
you might also see something that tells you if that source has been fact-checked or if it's been flagged as potentially unreliable.
Exactly. It's about giving people the information they need to decide if something is trustworthy without having to leave the platform or do a bunch of research on their own.
That would be super helpful. It's like having a built-in BS detector.
That's a good way to put it. Another good approach is to use US design to make credible sources of information stand out.
Okay?
This could involve visually highlighting articles from trustworthy news organizations,
Right.
or making it easier for users to report content they think might be false or misleading.
So it's like gently guiding people toward reliable information
Yeah,
without limiting their choice to explore different viewpoints.
exactly. It's not about censorship. It's about giving people the power to make informed choices.
So it's not just about stopping the spread of misinformation.
Right.
It's also about helping people become more media literate,
Yes,
giving them the skills they need to navigate the world of information online.
exactly. And UX design can play a big role in that process.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about the challenges and opportunities of UX design in shaping digital democracy,
We have.
from accessibility to misinformation.
It's a really interesting field that's changing all the time. And I think its impact on our police lives is only going to get bigger and bigger in the next few years.
Absolutely, but we can't forget that design is basically a tool,
Yeah,
and like any tool, it can be used in good ways or bad ways.
it all depends on us.
Exactly. It all comes down to how we choose to use it, and that's where you, the listener, come in. Because the future of digital democracy isn't just up to designers and politicians, it's up to all of us.
Yeah, we need to be informed citizens. We need to demand better design, hold platforms accountable, and use these digital tools in a way that supports a healthy democracy.
So, as we move into the last part of our deep dive, I want you to think about your own experiences online. Have you come across any really good or maybe really bad UX design when it comes to politics or civic engagement?
Like what works well, what's annoying, what would you change? Tell us about it on social media. We'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, it really is amazing to think about how much like influence design has on our digital experiences, especially when it comes to something as like crucial as democracy.
Definitely. It really does show that we need to be more aware of like the design choices that are behind all the platforms and tools that we use every single day.
Absolutely. So we've talked about the big picture stuff, but
Yeah.
let's get down to like the nitty-gritty.
Okay.
What can we as individuals actually do to like promote better UX design when it comes to digital democracy? It can
Yeah.
feel kind of overwhelming, like where do we even begin?
I think it's actually easier than you think.
Okay.
One of the best things you can do is just be a more mindful user.
Okay.
Pay attention to what it's like when you're using government websites and apps or online services.
So like when I'm trying to renew my driver's license online.
Yeah, exactly. Take note of what's working well, what's frustrating,
Uh-huh.
what could be better, and don't just keep those thoughts to yourself.
Okay.
Most government websites and apps actually have ways for you to give feedback.
Right.
So use them, tell them what you liked, what you didn't like,
Yeah.
and what specific changes you'd want to see.
It's like being a citizen designer,
Exactly.
actually giving input to shape those platforms.
Your feedback can actually make a real difference. And, in addition to giving your own personal feedback, you can also support organizations that are out there fighting for better UX design in government.
Oh, yeah.
There are groups working hard to push for more user-friendly and accessible digital services for everyone.
So it's like voting with your wallet and your voice.
Yeah.
Supporting those who are working to make design better.
Exactly. And maybe one of the most impactful things you can do is just spread the word.
Okay.
Talk to your friends, family, colleagues about how important UX design is in shaking digital democracy.
Like a grassroots movement for good design.
Yeah, exactly. The more people understand this connection, the more they'll demand change.
Right. So speaking of change, let's look ahead. What are some of the new trends in UX design that could have a big impact on digital democracy in the coming years?
Okay.
What's on the horizon?
One area I'm really excited about is using artificial intelligence, or AI,
Uh-huh.
to personalize civic engagement.
Okay.
Imagine like an AI chatbot
Yeah.
that could help you understand what's on your local ballot,
Right.
or even connect you with community groups based on what you're interested in.
That would be incredible. It's like having your own personal civic assistant.
Exactly. And it could even go further.
Okay.
Imagine AI tools that can translate all those complicated policy documents into plain language,
Wow.
or even create like personal summaries based on what you care about.
That's amazing. But AI can be a bit of a double-edged sword, can't it?
It can.
How do we make sure it's being used ethically when we're talking about something like this?
That's a really important question. We have to be careful about how these technologies are designed and used. Transparency is super important.
Mm-hmm.
People need to know how these AI systems work and what data they're using.
So no, like, mysterious algorithms making choices behind the scenes.
Exactly. We need to build these systems with human oversight and ethical considerations right from the start.
It's like we want AI to help our democracy, not control it.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance where technology helps empower citizens without weakening those democratic values.
So to wrap up our deep dive into digital democracy and UX design, I think the main message is pretty clear. The design choices behind the digital tools and platforms we use have a big impact on how we engage with democracy. It's not just about how things look. It's about access, participation, trust, and ultimately the strength of our democratic systems.
And the great thing is that we all have a part to play in shaping what this digital future looks like. By being aware users, giving feedback, supporting organizations that are pushing for better design, and talking about these issues with others, we can all work together to create a digital world that's more focused on users, that's ethical, and ultimately more democratic.
So the next time you're on a government website or signing a petition online or even just reading the news online, remember how powerful design can be. And ask yourself, how can we use this power to build a better democracy for all of us?
It's a question we should all be thinking about as we navigate this increasingly digital world.